All right. Does that mean that it's me who will speak from now on for 20 minutes?
Yes, and we of course
According to your...
you'll tell us more later, but then according to the questions raised.
Yes. Well, first of all, I would like to thank all of you for inviting me to speak. Ah, there is Terry Deacon.
Hello.
Good morning. Very pleased to see all of you. And it is my plan to say a few words on the article without repeating it. This is more than a quarter of a century ago that I wrote this article. And I would like to project a page, but I want to know whether you see it now. It shows opposition at the root of semiosis in the first line. Well, this is the title of the article, which I wrote for a Festschrift for Walter A. Koch, who is was at the time a adamant structuralist. And I tried to, when I began to write this paper, I was very much under the influence of structuralist semiotics still. But the idea is much older. The idea that the world is has its origins in oppositions. You find it in Anaximander. Something productive of hot and cold was separated off from the eternal at the genesis of the world. And from this, a sphere of flame grew around the air around the earth like the bark around a tree. Relying, I quote from encyclopedia, relying on a semiobiological model, Anaximander claims that the apeiron somehow generates the opposites, hot and cold. Hot and cold are themselves stuff with powers. And it is the actions of these stuffs or powers that produce the things that come to be in our world. The oppositions act on, dominate, and contain each other, producing a regulated structure. Thus, things pass away into those things from which they came to be. So the idea is evidently that oppositions are at the root of our universe. And not only at the root, they even generated the universe. They were the force of dynamis. This idea permeated through the writings of the pre-Socratics. Pythagoras is the oldest surviving of many tables of opposites propounded by philosophers. So the idea from that there was one general opposite at the origin developed into a table of opposites, a table of 10. Interestingly, the same number of the Aristotle's categories. 10 opposites that Pythagoras distinguishes according to Aristotle's report, finite, infinite, odd, even, one, many, male, female, right, left, rest, motion, straight, crooked, light, darkness, good, evil, square, oblong. This very old idea that opposites are at the root of everything culminated in information theory and in conjunction with semiotics, structuralist semiotics. This convergence was perhaps clearest in the writings of Roman Jakobson. You all know the idea that you have a start and a continuous division into two, and then you have can generate in only 5 steps the whole alphabet. I don't have to explain that to you, but it is a reminder that the universe of mind is also structured in terms of opposites. This idea permeates the thought of all, if not of most, if not all, structuralists here until their death, like in the case of Umberto Eco. This is the title page of his last book, From the Tree to the Labyrinth. Of course, Eco distanced himself somewhat from the early times of structuralism, with which he identified himself very much. But the fact that he returned to the tree of Porphyrios, Porphyry's tree, which is another representation of the universe of mind in terms of binary steps, binary oppositions, branchings, like in this wood, in these trees that you see here. They are all branching. This is a indicator that he was, well, if I exaggerate, obsessed, and this is certainly exaggerated, by this idea of branching, of the division of the universe of mind into binary steps. This was clearest in Eco's earliest writings that were heavily influenced by Louis Hjelmslow's thought. Like all French structuralists, they did not go directly to Saussure, but thought that Hjelmslow was a step ahead from Saussure. Well, the opposition, the idea in the semiotic tradition begins obviously with Saussure and his dictum, dans le langage, il n'y a que des oppositions, something like that. There is nothing but oppositions and differences, I think. He says, in language. So structures for Saussure are binary structures, and this idea was radicalized by Hemslow in his structural semantics. The universe of meaning became a binary universe. All meanings could be structured in in information theory in binary patterns. And so the line from structuralist linguistics and structuralist semiotics is clear. The key term of these times were binarism, just as in information theory. Binarism, the term comes from information theory, was thought to be the key to the universe. My paper was a paper, so to speak, without an argument in retrospect. It wanted to make both ends meet. In a Festschrift for the structuralist Walter A. Koch, I did not want to speak too badly of binarism, since his own writings are so much permeated with this idea of binarism. But my paper gives also a voice to those who criticize the idea of binarism. One who criticizes criticized it already in the 1960s was Derrida, but his alternative was not really a radical alternative. It was mainly a critique of binarism, and he had no model, as far as I see it, of substituting binarism. To the contrary, in a way, he remained a structuralist in his thought when he talked about the postponement of the other and the in-between. So the idea of the in-between is not yet, is still relatively binary, in my view. The most radical opposite to the idea of binarism is evidently in Peirce's critique of binarism as dualism. And his alternative is clear. His alternative is cynicism, continuity. You need a continuity as a third. So the Aristotelian idea of the tertium non datur, which is a binary idea, comes into, enters into this critique of dualisms. But of course, this is not only Peirce who opposed himself against the idea of the Aristotelian logic. The whole history of logic is a distancing from this idea of the tertium non datur, and also the advance of cybernetics shows that this idea was abandoned in or overcome at least by models such as the neural networks, which are not simply binary. Well, what is cynicism? And here you have this fierce critique of dualism. The cynicism, I quote from Peirce, even in its less stalwart forms, can never abide dualism. It does not wish to exterminate the conception of two-ness, but dualism, in its broadest legitimate meaning, as the philosophy which performs its analysis with an axe, leaving the ultimate elements unrelated chunks of being, this is most hostile to cynicism. And my paper has various other areas of application. The one where binarism seems to be most convincing is the theory of opposites. But if you look at it closely, you very soon see that binary, truly binary opposites, such as dead, alive, male, female, yes, no, etc., are not so frequent in language, and almost all of them have been, not only almost, actually all of them have been questioned. Dead, alive has a continuity of life in between. Male, female, I do not need to comment on it in the present discussion. But even in language, you have graded opposites. Young, old, has middle age in between. And more precisely, the vocabulary is not the key to our thought. If you look at texts, you have all kinds of grades from the age of 0 to 100 years old. Hot and cold as degrees of temperature. And then you have many areas of language where opposites do not work at all. And this is like color spectrum, grading, etc. And this is where actually structuralist semantics failed, where in a never admitted failure, they suggested that our thought, as far as its semantic structure is concerned, is structured in terms of oppositions. And this is not true. Although, of course, the fact that language has opposites must not be ignored. My last comment, or just a reminder, is the integration of Peirce's three categories into the continuity of life, where you believe that 1, 2, 3 go in the order of algebra. A birth is firstness, yes, but the continuity between birth and death is not secondness, it is thirdness. And death is secondness because it is lack of continuity. Interruption, brute interruption. And firstness is not interruption, it is openness of all possibilities, the category of firstness at birth. And in between, of course, thirdness. And this shows how indispensable it is to overcome dualisms. But of course, there are many other topics, the evolution of the universe, about which I cannot say anymore because time is up for me. Thank you for your attention so far.
Yeah, thanks. Now, comments and questions will go now. Yes, Katja.
Yeah, thank you very much, dear Winfried. Free comments or free notes. In your article, you speak also about Trubetskoy. Trubetskoy, it's a very particular case in the history of linguistics because it's difficult to understand whether he speaks ontologically or not, whether for him oppositions do exist really ontologically or they exist in the heads of linguists or semioticians, etc. So he was not very clear about this, and he said, for instance, that there are different types of oppositions, and for instance, privative in English, I suppose, privative,
yes.
privative oppositions could be also presented as graduate ones and vice versa. So like they were not oppositions indeed, but it's up to us to define them in one way or another. The second remark is that I didn't understand maybe to which extent it's important for you to distinguish between differences and oppositions. As to Saussure, he says, dans la langue, il n'y a que les différences. In the language, there are only differences. He didn't use the word opposition. It was important for him to insist on differences. So it was not the idea of opposition, but the idea of difference for Saussure. And third remark, I thought, listening to you about the phenomenon of enantiosemia in linguistics. You see the phenomenon of the existence of particular lexical units, words, that combine two opposite meanings. Like, for instance, in Latin, hostis, or in French, in modern French, hôte, which means host and guest. Freud was a great amateur of these words, etc. And you spoke about semiotics. Now the phenomenon of enantiosemia is still being discussed in linguistics. But do you think that in other semiotic systems, beside languages, parallels could be found to this phenomenon of enantiosemia? Thank you.
Well, this is, of course, a whole research program. Number one, Trubetskoy, Actually, he showed that the idea of opposition reduced to binarisms leads in the wrong direction, as you yourself said, showed, and my examples included this. You have different types of opposition, graded oppositions, etc., which already shows that language is not structured as the model of cybernetics and information theory suggests. The second remark, or the third, was about, the second was about Saussure. I agree completely. He did not use the term opposition, but the idea of differences is a binary idea. Saussure's idea of, at the root of Saussure's idea of difference is a binary way of thinking. He expressed that himself when he spoke about the negativity of structures. Structures in themselves are nothing. They are, or terms are nothing. They are what the others are not, or vice versa. So this not at the root of his model suggests binary structures. And the third is the idea of language forms that comprise both opposites. Well, this is very common, actually. It is the superordinate term in all tree diagrams. But the superordinate term, like hot and cold, is temperature, or black and white, or let's say green and blue is color. But superordinate terms do not always comprise or unite binary structures. But when they do, the question is whether they contain something new. And that is, or whether they are only the sum total of these subordinate structures. And the idea of thirdness in Peirce is that you need something new, continuity, for example, between opposites. And superordinate terms do not express this new idea as clearly as they do. I give this example from Greimas's binary structuring of a restricted semantic field, where the third seems to be the superordinate term, yes. But is it new? Is it a true third, or is it only a unit that unites the both in one? Thank you for these remarks.
Yeah, Jamin.
Thank you for the paper and for the presentation. of some of the basic arguments. And one thing that I was hoping that you would deal with, and I guess you could deal with it now, or really two things interrelated that you bring up in the paper but didn't get a chance to explore in your presentation so far, are the relationship between anti-symmetry and markedness that you bring up as a more complex approach to opposition theory, and the way that the way that those dynamics play themselves out at various levels of biosemiosis, which is a major component in the second half of the paper that's really germane to this group. So I wonder if you would say some things on those topics.
Yes, this is actually already an element that leads away from binarism, from true binarism. Jakobson's theory of markedness, which shows that binary structures or dualisms are not always symmetrical. And this is a topic which I developed in many other papers. The idea of markedness, which is actually the idea that was attacked by Derrida because he didn't like the idea of one of the two having some predominance. Derrida, in these lines of thought that he develops there, presents himself as a radical Democrat. Male and female is only one example of markedness, grammatically anchored, that had to be overcome, and is still, people are still fighting to overcome this markedness, which results in social privileges. But there are many other kinds of markedness where the marked form predominates and prevails over the unmarked form, which show that radical binarism does not work, not in language, and maybe not in many other areas too.
Okay, Paul.
Yes, let me lower my hand. I had more of a statement rather than a question. Although I suppose there are some questions in this. Going back to Katja's introduction of ontological oppositions. When I look at all of the oppositions that we've discussed today, they seem to me always to be phenomenological oppositions. And I think probably this was what Derrida and post-structuralism were most concerned with, particularly in the discussion of markedness. In a sense, you know, if we are Persian in our orientation, we always feel as though we've already got past that. Although it shouldn't be forgotten that the post-structuralists they had thirds as well, in the sense that, I mean, you alluded to it just now, in the sense that if you have a binarism, then that is to be deconstructed. And often what the post-structuralists will say is that the result, or what unites the binarism, is something that's undecidable, as in male and female, you know, to take that example. So another thing that was in your paper that just made me think was the implication that, and I think it's true, in much binarism, there's a reworking of the analogy with space, you know, something being next to something else. And that just reminded me that if you talk about something like the semiotic threshold, as Sebiok sees it, for instance, then you have to think about firsts, seconds, and thirds in a slightly different way. And you certainly have to think about binarism and space in a certain way, which is much different. I'm thinking in particular of the idea that the cell, in order to distinguish itself from the outside, or the first time it becomes aware of the outside, if you want to use the metaphor of awareness, is when it's invaded. And it also occurred to me in this stream of thought that a lot of people that I've spoken to who have gone through post-structuralism and then come to biosemiotics, they give a reason very similar to this, to do with binarism, that in fact what we are dealing with is not automatically a 1, 2, 3 structure, but a kind of holism in the first place before invasion of the cell takes place, and that is the true ontological opposite at the moment that secondness is introduced. I wondered whether that was a gross departure from your paper.
No, not at all. Thank you for these complimentary comments. I can only pick up one part of it, the tendency of space into binarisms. Is there a problem in?
Please repeat, yes, what you said.
There seems to have been an interruption of sound. If that is so, I repeat, yes, that I pick up Paul's keyword space and agree with him that language, this is a sphere where it seems that language imposes binarisms on the continuity of space. Here, there, up, down, left, and right. By the way, left and right already in the 10, in the list of 10 opposites of Pythagoras. Yes, but again, you have language is not the prison house, as some have thought in the history of semiotics. We can escape the binarisms of vocabulary by means of texts. We can modify the binarisms, and that is actually what happens. So the third is the text, so to speak, and I think this is a key for those who want to introduce Lotman in our discussion. Isn't it, Kalevi?
Yeah, very good. Right. Say starting from the whole, which actually creates these opposites.
Well, I think that was also my point that I made before, just before Terry came, that we start from thirds, don't we? We start, you know, or if it's Lotman, we start from the text. But if you think further back on this, since we're involved in this discussion of opposites, you know, and particularly to the quote from Peirce in respect of Cynicism, effectively what we are saying, unless I'm reading too much into this, is that nature is a whole, apart from that moment of secondness. And that moment of secondness comes to us through, well, it comes to us through a text. So we tend to interpret it on the terms of that text, even though we might be dealing with a pure Cynicism.
Okay.
Well, no further comments on this chapter.
And Terry.
Yes, let me lower my hand first. There we go. So first of all, I want to thank you for the bravery of talking about something you wrote 25 years ago. It's very hard oftentimes for us to defend something we wrote so far back in we all change. So I very appreciate what you did. I was very attracted by a number of things, but they all have to do with how opposition comes into the world, comes into semiosis in various ways. And let me start by saying I really appreciate the beginning quote from the Heraclitan fragments, where you talk about existence being the result of the balance of opposites. And of course, these are areas where in Heraclitus' work is largely ignored in order to focus on the process and change side of things. But he talks about the drink, the kaikion, for example, which you have to keep stirring to keep appropriate, so that it's appropriate. He talks about the lyre that makes sound by virtue of having the opposites of the tension of the string, or the bow in the bow and arrow example. That all things that are stable are the result of balanced opposites. And of course, your discussion, even of physics, where you talk about, you know, atoms being, you know, this balance of positive and negative. That idea of balance is really, and stability is really an important part of the story of opposites, I think. And so I thought it was quite brave of you, I should say, to extend your discussion all the way to a sort of metaphysics of the universe. Remarkable. And it made me think of a couple of things. First of all, a problem that I've struggled with, and I'll mention this initially, and then talk about a second piece of it. The first problem is that when we look at iconic and indexical relations, we talk about more or less formal correspondence, more or less contiguity or correlation. But when we move to symbolic processes, oftentimes we resort, and we find, of course, in language, these distinctive features and opposites being a really important part of the way we organize semantic and phonological spaces. That does not seem to be a big part of iconic and indexical. And so my sense is that what's going on is that we, in order to build linguistic communication, we really have to, in a sense, move to these more stable features. Opposites, even though they're like Peirce described as an axe that cuts a continuity, it gives us some kind of structure, some kind of stability. And I think that's necessary when you have a system of signs like language, whereas icons and indices can stand on their own individually. And it further reminds me of one other feature, and this has to do with this, what you might call the hierarchy of negation. And I see it best explained and best exemplified in the work of George Spencer Brown, where he begins with difference and distinction and indistinction, or confusion, as he sometimes describes it. That begins with distinctions, then he builds an arithmetic of distinctions and says that this shows you negations, and then goes from negations to opposites, and opposites to contradiction, and contradiction to paradox, hierarchically. Interestingly enough, Piaget's stages also move that way, at least up to the level of contradiction and system. And the post-Piagetians have sort of taken that up to paradox as well. There's a kind of interesting hierarchy of, first of all, once you begin with these negations, you can construct higher order negations of various forms from them. But also it looks as though we have to sort of, in order to build systems, we're almost always forced to make these cuts, to make distinctive cuts, to make oppositional cuts, and then they become more and more complex. And so I'm just interested in your reflection on that, on the process of generating oppositions and contradictions and so on.
Well, that is, of course, a new paper. This paper does not give an answer to this question, I admit. And there is, in fact, some contradiction in the title, because opposition at the root of semiosis suggests that it is at the root of a process itself. This idea that opposition is at the root of processes is very old. I can only repeat. It was in Anaximander's description of the origin of the universe. It comes from an opposition, and it is also at the root of many other thinkers. Systems theory is much influenced by this idea that opposition or dualisms are at the root of everything. But the link from oppositions to processes is the link of thirdness between firstness and secondness. It is continuity. You have no process without continuity. And this is the most general answer. But the question of the origin of this transition from dualisms is probably badly put, because it again suggests that thirdness comes after firstness and secondness. And as we saw, it is already in between. And so to say that we need to describe the transition from oppositions to processes by something else is insofar wrong as this something else is there at the beginning, I think. Right?
So I was actually pushing in the opposite direction. That is the starting from continuity. So I think that, for example, iconic and indexical reference is always simpler than symbolic reference, because symbolic reference requires relation to a system. Whereas, and as a result, the system is built up, it seems to me, in all cases, from distinctions and oppositions. But iconic and indexical relations that I think to be more basic in some respects are always continuous. They're graded, graded icons, graded indices.
Yes.
And so I was wondering if, so the title, this is where, as you mentioned, the title is somewhat troublesome. I would reverse it and say that semiosis ends up generating opposites to generate systems and starts from continuity.
That is a very good idea. But if generality, if continuity is at the beginning, then symbols must be at the beginning, because the characteristic of symbols is not, and here I disagree with you, convention or systematicity. It is the main characteristic, at least according to Peirce, is generality. The characteristic of symbols is not their arbitrariness, it is their generality. And generality is not present in icons, although there is continuity, and not in indices. And I agree with you that icons and indices are more widespread in the biosphere than symbols are, but this is a matter of consciousness. The capacity of recognizing generals is not so widespread among animals, as far as I see, than it is among humans. Or do I see this wrong?
So I would distinguish between generals and categories in this respect. I think that symbols provide us with categories, but certainly animals see, you know, the general icon of a tree, that all these variations have shared generality.
Yes, you're
and
right.
So
yes.
I guess I would say that the key to symbols is the kind of generality that language provides us is categorical generality. And categories, of course, have oppositional-like structure to them.
Yes, but do animals give signs that are general? Do they produce, they may recognize, they must recognize generals, but do they give, produce signs that are generals, or their signs are indexical or iconic? I believe, as you showed yourself in your research, right? Or did I read it wrong?
No, I think that's correct. The question is, in one respect, why it's only in symbols that we find such a demand to use distinctive features and binary oppositions, so critical to linguistic communication. And it's simply not there in animal communication in the same sense. There's wonderful discussion that Gregory Bateson has about how animals can signal to each other that they're not involved in an aggressive interaction, but they're playing. And his answer is that they have to sort of engage in that activity like they're going to bite, but not actually bite, not complete it. So in order to communicate the negation, they have to, you know, involved in the actual activity. So he's actually trying to describe, you might say, the origins of communicating negation. And it's difficult for other species for this reason. And so I'm just curious about why it is that the symbolic systems that we use, language in particular, is so constructed out of opposition and distinctive features, whereas iconic and indexical communication seems not to be.
Well,
it's a very big question, and I'm just sort of opening it up.
Indeed, this is a question that is challenging and is not really answered in this text, but the structure, the binarisms are evident. That is true. Maybe they are advantages for communicating our ideas, because to make bridges by means of texts, bridges between opposites, is easier than to have a vocabulary that covers the whole range between the opposites. So it is evolutionarily advantages, but this is a hypothesis which I did not develop, but I think it's worthwhile thinking about it. Is it advantageous for the survival of our species to have an instrumentarium at our disposition that has indeed undeniably binarisms, even though they are not always true dualisms, but they are often marked and gradual in between, etc. But the opposites are there. Yes, that is true.
It's a great answer, but just a little remark that obviously there is nothing to do with survival, because all the other, say, hundreds of thousands of species can survive well without that. But anyhow, now, Oscar.
Yeah, thank you. This is a general question, like an open question to everyone. And resuming Paul's phenomenological line that he opened up some minutes ago. So my question is, can we think semiotic oppositions as logical conflicts, or the resolution of logical conflicts? And in that sense, is semiosis, this, like, so to speak, mechanism or process for solving that logical conflict? I mean, I'm referring to the paper, either in cosmogenesis or in semiogenesis.
Well, these are actually two questions. The first is easier. The question whether oppositions necessarily involve conflicts. They involve potential conflicts, yes, but not necessarily conflicts. Like the title or the motto, no, not of this paper, but of another paper which I wrote. Oppositions are best friends, more or less, is a famous dictum of mine whose name I forget at the moment. I think it's a literary mind. So conflict is not necessarily involved, but potentially, yes. The clash, the idea of a clash, is the idea of Peirce's drastic secondness. And clash in the universe? Well, if the Big Bang was not a clash, maybe the clash is at the origin, at the root of our universe, which, according to the descriptions that I don't know, that I know of the Big Bang, evolved from radical symmetries, but only for a very short time, to broken symmetries. And if you see in a broken symmetry conflict, then yes, but broken symmetries, as we all know, are also the root of aesthetic pleasure. So they are not conflictual in a political sense. Tension between the structure of tension, for example, in literature, in drama, if there were no tension and conflict, we would not follow crime stories as we do in literature or in films. Is that what, does that give a partial answer to your question?
Absolutely. And by this logical conflict, I more particularly refer to having to make a choice between incompatible simultaneous options that are given at any time. And that's why I more or less try to frame this in a phenomenological sense. So if oppositions are a set of logical conflicts, and semiosis in a way is the resolution or the choice making between these different simultaneous incompatible options. That was more or less the, if we can.
Yes, but if that is so, I have another addendum to my answer. The idea that choices have to be made is evident, but do we have make choices always between opposites? I think this is simply wrong. We think of 0 and 1 in early information theory. Now we have 0 from 0 to 1 as a graded continuum. Think of courts, of law, jurisdiction, death or murder or not. The fact is that the juries do not only, or the courts do not only make binary decisions, they make decisions such as 2 years prison, 8 years prison, lifelong prison. So this is already a graded continuum and not a conflict between two. Of course, conflict in a more general sense, yes, but not necessarily between opposites.
Hey, Paul.
Thank you.
I'm off mute. I just wanted to come back to this this part of the discussion that Terry and Winfried had. Although it follows on from Oscar's point as well, in that we may be dealing with the phenomenological and the ontological again. Are we saying effectively, I mean, this is how I read it, oppositions are an extremely late development in the process of evolution? Very late.
Well, how late do you follow up our history of mind if you think that it is a good idea to begin with pre-Socratics, then you see oppositions as predominant pattern very early. Now the question is whether you have that in other cultures also. This is another question which requires a comparative cultural approach, but the Russians who were so interested in cultures that predate the Greek emphasized oppositions wherever you can think. So they saw oppositions also very early. But perhaps in Buddhist cultures, you have a different idea, which I have not thought about it, but Buddhism is not that old either. So we have to go back to other cultures and see whether thought in oppositions is so early or not, or later.
When the Earth was covered in nothing but no life at all except bacteria, you know, which is a long time in evolution, we assumed that there were oppositions in the sense of ontology between each and every bacterium, but they're not phenomenological oppositions in the way that we've been talking about them, which kind of leaves us with the notion that the higher level activities, the higher level trafficking of whatever between whatever phenomena are those to do with signification and communication, whereas cognition or a kind of proto-cognition could have lasted a long time, well before we got oppositions.
Yes, but then you say the opposite of what you said before, namely that opposition is at the root of semiosis, because it can be found in, and it's not a late development in the history of mind. Do I see that correctly?
I would actually revert. So this is my response to the title of this paper, is that I actually think that oppositions are generated. I take Peirce's argument to be that there are continuities, and then we take an axe to the continuity, and we prescind the opposites from something. And I also see Heraclitus, whose view is that the world is change, constant change, but that when things are, he says, when existence comes into being, it's when something stable happens. The stability is the result of opposites in balance, but the opposites are about tendencies, things going in certain directions. So I actually would invert the title in some sense of this paper. And this is not a criticism, it's just simply to recognize it's sort of what I would say, the Peircean inverse to structuralism, which is to say that continuity precedes opposition, that confusion, I mean, so taking George Spencer Brown's logic, for example, that confusion is the basis and distinction is the special case of what's confused when something is not confused. So in that respect, this is what I thought Paul was asking initially, that I would have argued that oppositions and binaries take work, evolutionary work, and this is not a cultural or human question. This is a question about, you know, sort of the broader sense of evolution, that I actually think that that opposition shows up instability at the point in which stable relations are created. And it's only when you have stable relations you can construct complex hierarchies. And so if things are in constant flux, but sometimes these fluxes can be set in balance and stabilized by oppositions that are linked to each other, then you now have a platform on which you can build something else. Because you need something to stand still, to be, you might say stable, unchanging, in order to build complexity. And so I actually see that there's this interesting, you might say, alternation between dynamics and flux and balance and stability that allows you to build level upon level upon level. That may be a bit complex, but.
No, I thank you for these remarks, and I believe they are, I agree with all of them, including the critique of the title, which I anticipated myself. But one minor question, Spencer Brown, with his idea that you need an axe to do the first step. How does he fit into this picture? Isn't he an arch structuralist when he argues like that?
In a sense, but what he's doing is, of course, he's trying to reconstruct or deconstruct symbolic logic, and beginning with really two concepts: the idea of confusion, that is, that which cannot be distinguished. And, in mathematics, we use an equal sign to do that. He wanted to say that the equal sign is simply the claim that you can't distinguish things. And then the concept of distinction. And he has two kinds of distinction, calling and crossing, which are basically distinction and difference. And I think that he shows exactly this, that simple distinctions can be combined in a way that, by virtue of generalities, that produce opposites, and that opposites can be combined to produce contradictions, and that contradictions can be combined to produce paradox. That it's a hierarchy, but you need each one to be constructed. You need to construct opposition before you can get contradiction. You need to construct contradiction before you can get paradox. So Gödel becomes the end of his argument, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an architectonic story, and in that respect, it's structuralist-like, but I see it as constructivist in closer to a Peircean perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for these compliments. And I admit, I've thought that later, that Spencer Brown would have deserved a sub-chapter of this article. Just as the bridge between his ideas and semiotic ideas is not very strong. Some semioticians know Spencer Brown, but not so many.
Yeah, it's sad because it's an excellent work.
Yes. It's the root of radical constructivism. You cannot participate in the discussion of radical structuralists if you don't know Spencer Brown. But this is another topic, perhaps future meetings.
No. Okay, Jamin?
Let me unmute and lower my hand. A few follow-up questions to themes that have been introduced by a number of people over the past hour. I keep seeing what I consider to be a problematic division between structuralism and Peircean semiotic, especially if we've if we recognize, as Winfried does in his chapter, the game changer that is anti-symmetry and marked relations, which, as Michael Shapiro has pointed out, really does dovetail into a theory of the interpretant. When markedness comes into the picture, which it usually does whenever there's any kind of purposive action, however vague, then there's an action of the interpretant, which really does introduce semiosis. So I'm my perspective is, and I think it's simpatico with Winfried's chapter anyways, whether or not I'm reading too much into it, he can tell me, but that, and this also follows Michael Shapiro, some insights from Michael Shapiro, that what Peircean semiotic does is bring structuralism into its own. Firstness and secondness are diametrically opposed to each other. So in any process of semiosis, there's going to be some aspect of opposition necessarily. Now bringing it back to the question of life and early life, which biosemiosis considers to be the threshold for semiosis. Like Paul was mentioning, at the level of bacterium or single-celled organisms, there's always going to be some sort of vague thirdness directing the basic processes between seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, or attraction and repulsion, however you want to talk about it, that those vague levels of phenomenology, there's going to be choice. That I think Colóquio is trying to revive a focus on this, his recent work on confusion, which brings back Spencer Brown's priorities, and his recent work on choice, that there's something really important here to focus on. I don't think that we should be distracted by the debate between structuralism and Peircean semiotic, because I think that they're actually not just compatible, but that Peircean semiotic reveals the true potential of structuralism, or gives structuralism its true home, so that all of these debates are still valid and still forming. And I would be interested to know what you think about those possibilities.
Well, this is a hot topic: pluralism in semiotics. Of course, as an author of a handbook of semiotics, I've studied all directions, or all important directions. Some may have deserved more attention than others. But the idea that everything is compatible is dangerous. It leads to eclecticism, and it is necessary, in my view, to admit some incompatibilities. I agree with you that it is worthwhile looking at common denominators and to emphasize those. Otherwise, you cannot continue doing semiotics in the broader sense. But if some semioticians say the basic unit of research in semiotics is not the sign, then I think it's better to say here is an incompatibility. You cannot say the basic unit of semiotics is the study, semiotics is the study of sign. And if you read in more detail, you will find that these scholars do no longer define semiotics as the study of sign, but some of there are various alternatives. One of them, more recent, is to say semiotics is the study of meaning. Well, this would be a new topic to refute this definition, but it is important also, that is what I only want to say, to mark the differences, the opposites, the oppositions, let's say, not the opposites, between incompatible positions in semiotics. And as I said, the worst semiotics is the one that mixes all together in an eclecticism that is unbearable. This does not necessarily mean that I'm against other approaches, other directions. To the contrary, my handbook tries to present as many as possible. But then to conclude that everything goes is a dangerous and not a recommendable path in semiotics. But I certainly do not answer all your questions. You had some other remarks, and I apologize for not addressing all of them. I picked out this one clue only.
Well, I certainly agree with you there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Very good.
This is a question for the president of the International Semiotic Association, of course, who is among us.
Good.
Right?
Thank you once again. As far as I can see, we represent here various academic disciplines, and there are certainly disciplines which are more sensible to oppositions than others. For instance, we need certainly oppositions in linguistics, but not for the description of all linguistic levels, not at all. They work very well for phonology, but not so good for grammar or for syntax. For instance, in order to do history of linguistics, I don't need oppositions at all. But maybe it's a question of definition. And so, excuse me if you have already spoken about it, but nevertheless, it's just very interesting for me. Winfried, how would you define opposition?
Well, that is a question like the one that has never been asked to Noam Chomsky. What is a sentence? He has never given an answer to this. He's simply taking it for granted. But in a way, this is a question like the question of giving as if you ask a mathematician about definitions of axioms. You can enumerate the axioms, but you cannot explain them. You cannot define them in this way. I observe what people describe as like linguists do so with all words that are used in language and use. How is this term used? And how does Saussure, for example, use it? How does Umberto Eco use it, etc.? This I can answer with reference to their use of the term, but I would not want to dare to give a definition of oppositions in contrast to non-oppositions in the universe. Well, perhaps the lack of continuity. You can answer it with Peirce as saying opposition is secondness, and what is missing is thirdness, that is continuity. Opposition, insofar I can give an answer, is consideration of two poles of a continuum, where the continuum is between which the continuum is ignored. So it's always an incomplete constellation.
Thank you. Is it closer to incompatibility or is it closer to difference? Because listening to you, I had an impression that sometimes you were speaking about incompatibility and sometimes about difference.
Well, I believe that you are right that I use the term opposition in this paper to include Saussure's concept of difference. And you may consider this reductionist. If there is, of course, it is not the same. But as I said in an earlier reply to you, when Saussure reduces structures to whatever they are not, then you have a opposition between positive and negative at the root of his concept of difference. So I think a different opposition is at the root of Saussure's concept of difference. Opposition is at the root of his concept of difference. Now, incompatibility means that you focus on the extremes. As I gave examples from current history of semiotics, various schools, for example. And I said some of them are incompatible. They are in an opposition, but not in all respects. There are common cores between them. There is continuity between them, but sometimes it is important to highlight the oppositions to avoid eclecticism in approaches according to which everything goes. That is what I mean. That is my answer to your question, I believe.
Thank you. I've just thought that for Saussure, the concept of difference supposed also the concept of value, valeur. And that's in value, we have not this idea of opposition. Value is just value. Value is difference, but it's already another question, another story.
No, I think it happens that I'm writing a paper on this topic, and so I cannot help contradicting you. Value is always negative in Peirce. It's not in Saussure. It's not a positive value, and the idea of a negative value being something that is other is not is again thinking in terms of dualism.
Well,
I do not.
he took this term from economics, and when in economics you speak about the value of money, for instance, that the basic idea will be that of difference.
Yes, but this would lead too far now, because Saussure makes very clear that there is a difference between monetary value and value as pure value. That is his key term. In linguistics, we only have pure value, and these values are negative, whereas in economics, you have positive value, and this is a topic that needs more going into depth that is not possible here. But pure value is not value that is gradative in language. Where does Saussure speak about graded transitions? No, everything is negative. That is, it is so because it is not the other, right?
Yeah,
So,
the problem with him is that he's very contradictory. He says one thing, and then in his writings, he doesn't respect always what he has said. And when I think now, if everything would be negative, it would be just not possible to use language. But that's already a problem.
yes, and there's the other problem that Bailly and Séchier distorted some of his ideas, but this is really a new topic.
Yeah, very good. Let me add just a little thing about that third that sort of creates or is linking the two, either two different or two opposites. Say in case of truly this Persian approach, as you, Winfried, described, you describe that as a continuity, say. But when for biosemiotics, one very important problem all the time is that difference between life and non-life, what there is precisely, if there is a semiotic threshold, where we can point or put our finger where this third appears. So, and then one way, one of solutions is that is an independent mediator. So, mediation in the new kind of independently reproducible mediator appears, what is not there in non-living chemistry. So that's and that is now a little bit different way to describe that appearance of opposites too, or let's say in a way there are sort of different things in a non-living world, but now how this reading via use of mediator creates these again for an organism. So that's probably a rather different story. So that means that was in your paper, and also in a way today that you did not say make that radical difference between life, living, non-living, or that existence of this lower threshold. Maybe it's not really there, but say that has been one of problems for biosemiotics to
yes,
try to discover it.
Well, I think the question of the threshold is not the question that can be answered or not even discussed at the end of such a long conversation. But I thank you for reminding us that thirdness is not only continuity. It is also mediation. Here you are completely right. And mediation is not the same thing as continuity. But what the two have in common is something new. And this is why it is wrong to associate Peirce with Hegel, because some people with a superficial knowledge of Peirce's phenomenological system believe that thesis, antithesis, and synthesis is a portrait of Peirce's firstness, secondness, and thirdness. As far as firstness and secondness is concerned, this may even be so. But Peirce's idea of thirdness is not the idea of a synthesis. It is the idea of continuity. It is the idea of mediation in a new, something that brings a new element and not only combines the first two in a kind of synthesis.
Terry.
Your question, Kelly, brings up another way of talking about this oppositional notion, and that has to do with normativity. Living things involve what I would call normative chemistry. There are things that are good for a bacterium or bad for a bacterium, a thing that the bacterium avoids or is appropriate, and normativity has polarity to it. And so one of the interesting things about the origins of life is it's the origins of that polarity. You don't have living things that lack that. And I want to bring this back to where we began, and in fact, where the Greeks began. Go back to Heraclitus, one of my favored thinkers in this respect. The opposites that he's talking about are opposite tendencies, things that will tend to happen. So in his drawn bow, there's a tendency for the bow to straighten itself out, and a tendency for the thong that holds the bow together to be less stretched. But those two tendencies oppose each other. In living systems, of course, every living thing has a tendency to persist, a tendency to resist being disturbed. And it's with respect to that tendency, with respect to the chemistry that maintains that, that there is now normativity against a tendency. And I wanted to distinguish that because when we talk about some of the other ways of generating opposition, I'm thinking about the 0 and 1 in computing. What of course happens is that voltage in most computing systems varies from no voltage to 5 volts. And what happens is that we artificially push those poles. And of course, this is part of Jakobson's idea of distinguishing features as well, and the basis of phonetic distinction. For example, voice, voiceless, and so on and so forth. That is that these poles are not, they are not tendencies any longer. They're just extremes, and we divide the extreme. These are really two very different, and you do a very good job, I think, of bringing this distinction out. The oppositions of tendencies, and so when we see conflict and that sort of thing that Oscar brings up, we're talking about tendencies that work in the opposite direction. When we talk about a charge or magnetism, where we've got north-south positive or negative poles. They have opposite tendencies, and so they can be in balance. But voice and voiceless are not tendencies. And they're different ways of creating opposition. And I thought you did a very good job, first of all, of pulling it apart, but they're really different. And I'm sort of interested in how you think about that difference.
Well, this is this a question to Kalevi? Because you addressed his talk, or?
In a sense, it's to all of us, in the sense that it's both the normativity, in the sense that we use it, is usually about tendencies and opposing tendencies, and because they have a directionality to change. The directionality can be in conflict. The directionality of attraction and repulsion in electrons and protons, for example, or particles and antiparticles. They have directionality to them, tendencies. But that's different than when we talk about the distinctive features, the oppositions that we use often in language, whether it's semantic features or phonological features. There we have this sort of, and I love Peirce's way of talking about an axe that cuts between the extremes and sort of artificially separates the extremes. We use that, and that's a very different kind of opposition. And in your presentation, you talk about those two differences. And I think you do a pretty clear job. And yet the origins of life story, which I think most of us in the biosemiotics community believe is the origins of true semiosis, also does come with it a tendency. And this is what interpretation is about. It's a tendency to do something. It's active. And under those circumstances, there's always normativity.
So I think this problem of normativity is a big problem. We need to devote a whole seminar for this in the future. We haven't yet analyzed that concept. I think it will be important. But let's now try to conclude.
Right.
Say, anybody wants to say a few or any word about current topic, or after that?
Only very briefly, I agree with everything that Terry said, and I'm going to think about these two concepts, normativity. Tendency is something which is easier for me to conceive. Normativity, I know norms, but what do you mean by the difference between norms and normativity? Norms are laws, right, in the sense of Peirce. But normativity, do you just mean there are norms, there are laws? In that case, I think, all right.
So I wouldn't use the term laws, but there are tendencies, and that tendencies can be opposed to each other. And so I like to think about, for a bacterium or even a virus, which we're all struggling with these days, there are environments that are good for that virus and that are bad for that virus. The virus will act with respect to some contexts in one way and a very different way to other contexts. That tells us that that's not just chemistry. Chemistry does not have that feature by itself. This is something that life has. And so that's what I meant by normativity, just that tendency. And we can describe and reflect on it in lawful terms. But again, I think those sort of opposed tendencies and what I would call normativity in the abstract comes first.
Okay.
Paul.
I just had a very small question on a point of detail. Perhaps Katja can help us out with this, but I just wanted to clear this before we go. Given that we use phonological oppositions as somehow fundamental, is that the case? You know, in the sense that Trubetskoy was investigating, can there be phonological oppositions that are like true oppositions?
Katja, could you answer? No?
What, maybe I didn't understand the question. He worked primarily on phonology. That is, his phonology was the basis of everything he did after that. Is that the question?
No, my question is a little bit more advanced than that. It's simply that, you know, is it the case that you can have pure oppositions in phonology, you know, based on the shape of the mouth, based on the auditory landscape, and so on? Well, I guess I know the answer to this. It's no, isn't it?
But what do you mean by pure oppositions?
Well, correct, absolutely.
But once again, what does it mean, correct to absolutely? He distinguished three kinds of oppositions. And as I said, it depends on the scientist how to interpret one or another kind of oppositions. So it meant that they were not ontological for him. If that is your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Very good. So, many thanks to Winfried. And what will be the topic of our next meeting? That was, say, we have some people who have proposed to talk, Morten and Paul, for instance, from those who are here. Any proposals from them or any other ones?
I'd be very interested to hear from Morten.
So what I have said is that since Don said, well, hinted that I could present on an animal topic, I could present on one of my most recent articles, either an article titled "What Can Be Known About Future Umwelten?" Futurology, or an article called "Current Human Ecology in the Amazon and Beyond, a Multi-Scale Ecosemiotic Approach," which comprises an Amazon animal case study, but also some theoretical and methodological development within ecosemiotics. So that's at least what I'm ready to present, one of those, at a date that you find suitable. Could be next time or it could be later.
So, colleagues, responses?
Shall we vote for which of those two papers we'd like to hear?
No voting, no, just persuasion.
Okay, future Umwelten, it's absolutely essential.
Let me just check the date. So in 2 weeks.
2nd of October.
2nd of October. That should be fine. Yeah.
It did work for me as well. I can be there. So I would love to hear that paper as well.
Okay, then Morten, maybe you want just to send also 2 sentences or something in addition to your paper, which I will distribute. Okay?
I'll think about comments, but at least the paper, yes.
Yeah.
Very good.
Mm.
Thank you. Excellent.
Yeah, thank you very much again, Winfried. That's
yes, thank you very much.
Our honor to have you here and to discuss with you. We cannot hear you at the moment.
Right. I have to revert the mutinying. It's my honor to be with you, such an illustrious group of semioticians, and keep me informed about the next meetings.
Okay.
Send me the paper so that I can see if you invite me, whether I can participate.
Sure.
It would be wonderful.
You'll be with us. Very good. Have a good weekend, rich in ideas and semiotic writings.
Thank you, Calvi. Thank you, Winfried.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
all.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.